name is Jonah Jonathan, and welcome once again to the Jazz Musician's Voice. I'm speaking today with a wonderful bassist, Rob Duguay. He actually was the host of the Jazz Standard. He's a fantastic musician. Ended up first meeting him at William Patterson University. He ended up coming to William Patterson because of Hurricane Katrina, and he got flooded out of school in New Orleans. Miraculous story about recovery there, because he came to William Patterson, ended up meeting Mulgrew Miller. Through Mulgrew, essentially got recommended to do this job at the Jazz Standard. Rob is now living in Mexico City right now. He's a true traveler, and we talk about his life, and we talk about his time at the Jazz Standard, and we talk about a lot of the issues of why that club closed down. It's an extensive conversation, and one I think you all will be pleased to check out. I really hope you check it out, share, and start the conversation about how we can hold our leaders at the top accountable for saving this art form of jazz. None of these jazz clubs in New York should be faced with the possibility of closing or not able to pay their bills because of the epidemic. And it's just a shame that this art form of jazz has to struggle. Essentially, they closed these clubs so that we could try to get through this coronavirus. So I hope, if any of the leaders of this city, the city of New York, or the leaders of the United States see this, it's on you. It's your responsibility to help save these jazz clubs. The Jazz Standard is a landmark in New York, and so many legendary musicians have played there that have since passed. So it's a shame that it's closed, and I was just so glad to speak with Rob Duguay. So thanks for watching. Check out this series. Like this video, share it with your friends, and stay tuned because we have a lot more future interviews coming. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm speaking with a really great friend of mine, a great bassist, Rob Duguay. We actually went to William Patterson together many years ago. And Rob, you've led a very interesting life, very educated person too. And I remember just as I was starting a program, you actually you have come from attending school in New Orleans and ended up like almost a refugee because of what happened with Hurricane Katrina. You came to William Patterson instead. You were going to go to school in New Orleans, and I remember you had the half-size bass because all that stuff was crazy down there. So we'll talk about that, but let's start with your background. You were born in Canada, but you grew up in Connecticut. So talk about your early life and how you got started in music.
Yeah, so it was really my mother's side of the family that's quite musical. All of them can pick up the piano and kind of sing songs and stuff like that. We used to, at family parties, we used to sit around and sing songs around the piano, old Irish songs and old French songs. And so they'd be hanging and maybe having a couple of whiskeys or a couple of drambuis and stuff like that, and they'd sing songs into the night. We'd go to sleep and say, "Hey, you guys are making too much noise." They say, "No, you come sing with us. If you wanna hang, you can hang. You can have a late night tonight." So I think we got all of us kids. I have a brother and two sisters that we're all around music a little bit. My mom forced us all to take piano lessons when we were young too. So I definitely had a musical ear. And then towards in high school is when I actually switched to bass. I just started messing around with the bass in my friend's basement. He had all drums and keyboards, guitars, microphones, and we just go downstairs and just mess around musically for hours. And I started to gravitate towards the bass because I liked it, and I guess maybe because I was the best at it out of the group of friends or that kind of thing. So yeah, then I've been crawling my way out ever since.
Yeah, you have a unique thing because you attended University of Vermont for business, uh, and then ended up getting much more serious about music. So talk about like University of Vermont, attending that. I'm familiar with some of the past players that have come out of there because it's got a great jazz program. Um, and since then, there's different people leading it. The last I knew was Ray Vega. But before that, I remember encountering a great trumpet player. I think his name is Alex Toff, and he was playing a lot. And there's great players out of Vermont, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's actually crazy how good the program is. So, the little backstory is the New Yorker, Dr. Alexander Stewart. He's a tenor player, played with Lionel Hampton, played with a ton of cats. Like, a lot of people in New York, if you mention Alex Stewart, would be like, oh yeah, man, I used to play with him back in the day, or we used to be section mates, that kind of stuff. And he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he didn't want to go up there. He was looking for work and looking to, secure a better future for himself and his family. And he took the job up in Vermont. And to my knowledge, I don't think he really wanted to go up there. He's like, Vermont, what the hell, man? I'm a New Yorker. But he quickly fell in love with it, in love with the place. It's a beautiful place to study. They had all the essential things that students need to study and become better musicians. And actually, there's a small history up there too with Big Joe Burrell, who's a famous tenor player who was hanging with Count Basie and cats like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
back in the day.
A
So
lot of
there's some
people
music.
don't know. Like I was writing my master's thesis kind of from abroad in Vermont, and because my father was a professor at UVM. I had free access to the library, so I would go in the basement, and I went to the archives, and I found out that there was actually a big band venue in Mallett's Bay, which is not far from.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that venue actually was like a vacation place for like the soldiers during the war. And Duke Ellington came through there. Count Basie, all of the great guys came through that big band hall.
Mm.
And there's not much written about it. It eventually ended up burning down.
Wow.
Ended up finding about that in the archives there, and that's not on the internet. Like
Wow.
sometimes you get lucky, you find these like gems.
That could be a couple interviews for you right there, man. A little project right there.
Yeah, there's certainly projects. I think believe it or not, like there's times in history where things were not documented that now are documented. I mean, even in my thesis about the Harlem jazz scene, I get contacted by journalists from like recently it was Wall Street Journal, and they want to know like about the different places because there's no info about it online. There's nothing.
Meanwhile, you're like, hey man, you're on Wall Street. Why don't you just take the train up the street?
Yeah, go. Essentially,
Go up to
anybody's got to go
125th, bro.
and dig it out. So yeah, mate, Vermont, it's definitely a different place.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
to finish real quick, I was a business student. I knew I wanted to play music, but I was just walking on the campus like my first week as a freshman at University of Vermont, and I heard the big band rehearsing. I was like, "Oh man, yeah, this is awesome!" So I went in, and I was just sitting in the back. It's a huge, kind of like it's like a small auditorium basically, where they were rehearsing, and I was sitting in the back, kind of like trying not to interrupt, and I'm just like digging on the big band, and then I go up to Dr. Alexander Stewart, and I was like, man, the band sounds great, blah blah blah. And he's like, who the hell are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm Rob. I play the bass. He's like, why didn't you come to auditions last week, man? What the hell's your problem? And I was like, oh, well, I'm a business student. I didn't think I could maybe be in the bands too. He's like, dude, of course you can. And we did like an audition the next day. He brought this guitar player, Garrett Schmidt from Chicago, who's a great player, and I learned a lot from him. And we did a little dude, like he accompanied me while we did a small audition. He's like, dude, you're in the band, like so.
Yeah.
It was kind of it was funny because he was like, man, I need you. Like, what the hell? We got a few ensembles. Like, you should just join one. Come on. So I ended up joining the band the second semester, and then throughout the rest of my tenure there.
The thing that strikes me about Burlington is like it's got actually a scene downtown. Right now, it's virtually dead because of coronavirus. But you would have like, especially even in the jazz festival, there's people like you have hotels and you have certain bars that people play, and a lot of great musicians come from the school, come through, and like Nectar's downtown was like the home of Fish before they became big. That was the start, and
it's a great music scene. Red Square.
Yeah, Red Square.
I played at. I used to host a jam session called the Meow Mix over at Radio Bean.
Yeah,
Radio Bean. We did it every Friday night, man. It was jamming. Yeah. We had all these cats coming in.
And then Hotel Vermont, now the Juniper Lounge. They, Vega usually brings people through there. I hope all of it'll come back after the epidemic. Certainly, even up here in Burlington, we've got like 3 spots that closed, and and now that things were open for a while, but after things started getting cold, they reinstituted the orders. So now, like everything is closed right now, and we'll get to that further in the interview because. I mean, essentially, you were really one of the important people in this music. You were the host at the Jazz Standard. So, I mean, you encountered so many legendary musicians by doing that, and I remember overhearing many stories. Like you filling in for Mogu Miller, for example. So, we'll talk about that a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about like when you finished, you went to William Patterson. Talk about the whole New Orleans story and Hurricane Katrina, because that happened. You were right in the middle of it,
Yeah, I moved down about 2.5 weeks before the storm, I think, and I was just getting. It was cool because I arrived at town and they said, "Man, you're a bass player. You're gonna get so much work. Like you have no idea. You're gonna be playing every day." 2 or 3 gigs a day, and I was like, man, yeah, that's cool. And because I think like two of the main bassists had just taken gigs like out of town, and so I was already working even before school started, like playing a few gigs, even with a couple of the professors from the school. And I had about 1 week of classes, and then they announced the storm would come. And I was living with a roommate named Steve Bidwell. He's a great drummer. And he had been through a storm almost, the hurricane season 1 year before. And they closed down the school for a week. Everybody evacuated, and literally not even a drop of wind. He told me he left a empty Coke can on his grill or something. It didn't even get knocked over. So he was kind of a little, we were both kind of like, all right, well, we'll get out of town, but we're not going to like strap the refrigerator to our cars and like, try to get the hell out of here. There was a lot of people really worried. You see them doing that kind of stuff, like taking their kitchen table on the top of their car. They took everything out of the place. But we were a little more like, all right, let's just take a suitcase and get out of here. So, you know, we left some pertinent items behind, instruments, computer stuff. It's one of those things where you're like, I'm going to be in a car in August evacuating to Texas. You don't want to have your computer sitting in the back of the car when it's 110 degrees out.
Yeah.
And you don't want to bring your upright bass, because what are you going to do? Everywhere you're going to go, you're going to take your bass into the restaurant. You're going to take your bass into there. You know, it was just kind of weird. So anyway, long story short, we made it. It's about a 4-hour drive, I think, from New Orleans to Houston. It took us the full day, man. It took us like 16 or 17 hours. And
Wow.
we arrived to my cousin's house, which we were very grateful for. And, you know, then we kind of, we hid out for a little bit in Texas until we realized we just shook hands. We're like, I'm going this way, you're going that way, and we're not going back to New Orleans. So we had about a 5-foot water line in our apartment.
Wow.
And lost most of our stuff, if not everything. And then that's when I ended up at William Patterson. I started writing to all these schools and say, hey, I got flooded out in New Orleans. Can you know, are you able to squeeze me into your program? Lots of places said, yes, yeah, come on out to Oregon, come out. I wrote to like 12 places that had master's degree in jazz performance, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And long story short, I could get more detailed, but long story short, I just showed up at Willie P, and Dr. David Dempsey was super sweet to me. And also I met Mr. Mulgrew Miller that the same day. We met in the hallway, and it was great, man. They really took care of me. And Dr. Dempsey, literally, he was showing us a little side story to finish up. Mulgrew had just arrived, and I just walked in randomly. I didn't tell Dr. David Dempsey I was showing up. And so I walked in and I slapped Mulgrew 5, and I didn't even know who he was. So he just looked like a fucking cool guy, you know. He had the collar out, you know, like he always did. He had the big collar and the neck.
I have my own stories with that. Like, you know, I went to see Ron Carter, Golden Striker Trio, when I was just getting into jazz, like 2003, right when they started. My dad took me to like Regatta Bar, and what struck me, I remember at the end, I shook this guy's hand, and it was Mulgrew Miller, and I remember the handshake. Sure enough, later I watched this Rufus Reid bass, you know, video, and Mulgrew's on that, and then all of a sudden I'm at William Patterson, I'm meeting this guy again, and yeah, Mulgrew always strikes you like he's a bad cat, you know. He's got the coat, and he's got the necklace, almost like he's a mafia type guy, and he comes on the piano, it's just like bam, you know. And to intersect, you know, you're talking about like New Orleans. Like, I've always kind of avoided the South because I read about like Jaco Pastorius. Like, I wanted to play upright, but I couldn't because with the humidity, my bass kept collapsing. You know, he was talking about it in an interview, and he's like, the weather there is just so hard to deal with for upright bass. So I think that's why he kind of went to electric. You know, he's like, I'm not going to even deal with this, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, William Patterson, you know, you and I both, we got inspired by Mulgrew, and there was great musicians there. And, you know, essentially you're kind of a global traveler. I mean, you were in Paris before, and, you know, we're speaking now, we haven't mentioned this on the interview, but you're in Mexico City right now. And, you know, you're a global guy. So now talk about like, you know, you lead quite many groups in New York, and you're a successful musician in that. But the thing we really want to get to is, you know, you're the host for the Standard, the Jazz Standard, and unfortunately in these rough times, the Standard is forced to close right now. And so talk a little bit about how you got that job, and share some stories and talk about the Standard, you know, because it's such a legendary venue.
Sure. Yeah, so I left there. I worked there for about 7 years, and I left there about 7 years ago. Actually, I think it was. I actually have no idea, but it was probably 2014 that I left. So it's been almost about as long as 7 years that I haven't worked there. But it's still one of my second homes, just going in there and seeing all the friends there. And actually, so when I finished William Patterson, it's a perfect transition because that's exactly the timing. I finished at William Patterson, and I had a lot of gigs set up that summer just after getting out. I don't think I went to Europe, but I don't think I did. I think I did all East Coast stuff, and I was in Vermont for a period of time for the Jazz Festival, of course. And I was, in Connecticut and Jersey and DC, all this kind of stuff. So I was doing this little East Coast thing, dating a girl at the time who lived in Manhattan, and I woke up one day and just checked the internet, which I rarely did that back then, on Craigslist. And I was like, oh, let's see if there's any gigs on Craigslist, music gigs.
Yeah.
And so I looked up for music gigs. And then there was nothing, or there was some BS like, play for free at my sister's wedding or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so then after that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to look for music. And then I clicked on jobs, and it said holding live interviews today, open call, I think they call it. Open call, that means no emails, no sending the resume, no nothing, just show up and essentially get in line to be interviewed for this maitre d' position for the jazz club. And I was like, man, I got my suit from, I played a gig the night before. I was just really passing through New York City. Didn't live there, didn't have an address at that point, because I was like just staying with my girlfriend. I'd maybe go stay with my parents, go up to Vermont, go stay with friends there, whatever. I was just a vagabond for the summer, living out of my car, but essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when I got then I had a nice interview with a lovely person, and then a second interview. And I was really impressed by, and actually funny enough, Mr. Miller was playing that week when I went for my interview. I walked in the door, and I think I had been there only once before, when my family was in town. We went to see Javon Jackson, I think, was playing there. And so, long story short, I had never worked in a restaurant before, so my resume was blank. Not my resume, but the job application. And so I handed it to them, because they're like, here, take this application, fill it out, and essentially get in line. So then I show up and I start talking to the lady, and the application's blank. She's like, you want to tell me what the hell is this? And I said, well, listen, I got a business degree. I have traveled, to a few countries and played. I know how jazz clubs operate because I've played in a bunch of them before. It's really my passion. I think that I'm more than qualified. I know a lot of people on the scene, and then she asked for a recommendation. I was like, if you need a recommendation, I saw Mulgrew Miller's playing tonight. Maybe you could just ask him about Rob Duguay. And she's like, what? You know Mulgrew Miller? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, okay. She circled my name and, essentially passed me on to the second round interview after that. And the rest is, quote unquote history. Actually, something I've never really told anybody is that I was kind of living out of my car. Like some nights I would sleep in my car, like up in Harlem. I would find like a free parking spot on the street. I'd wake up, try to like do my hair like this, put on the best looking collared shirt that I had, because I was in between apartments. I think for like a month I was maybe stay at my girl's house one night, but then not the other night, and that kind of stuff. So for a number of weeks anyways, I was living out of my car and going to work.
It's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, similar things happened with me, even in New York. Like essentially, like there's so much. I remember I was there in 2008, and I was like, there was so much work and stuff to do in New York that I just like, I needed to be in my car. I was like, I don't have time. I was playing in the park, and then I'd be playing gigs, and I was like, I don't have time to drive back to New Jersey, so I just want to stay in
Yeah.
my car. And I
Yeah,
would
man.
find places like Central Park or like Harlem, and there's something to be said about doing that when you're younger, but then you get older and you realize like that's no way to live.
No, definitely
Yeah,
not.
like and um, we see this now in jazz, and this is something that I try to talk to a lot of cats about, like presentation. Like so many of these people are essentially living. Some of these really established musicians are living in an apartment with six other people, and like don't take showers, and they go to these gigs, and you can clearly smell. And like, um, I just look at I look at Miles Davis and that great second grade quintet in the '60s, and I'm like, that's a far cry from what you see in the park. These people not dressed and like essentially
Yeah.
wearing saggy pants and stuff. I just there's a certain standard that I essentially learned from guys like Ron or Mulgrew or Russell Malone,
Hmm.
and if all of us could just hold to that standard, I think people would value this music more. I mean, it concerns me as a journalist and as a musician. I feel it's like my responsibility to start speaking up on this because essentially
Hmm.
that's what happened when I started doing these interviews like 10 years ago. I was like frustrated that there's so many people playing for free. They weren't dressing up. They weren't doing this. And now we're seeing the direct results of what's going on. I mean, there's a lot of issues in this music. And if they're not addressed,
Hmm.
this is what happens. The standard has to close. Other clubs have to close. Um, I think we need to make sure that this music is held to the standard and in a sense exclusive enough that people want to pay money to go and see music, because if people don't pay money, then things like this have to happen. And the standard is an amazing club. I took my son there. I mean, I remember it was one of the last times I saw Harold Mabern was at the standard.
Hmm.
And I mean, you just had that awesome job there where like essentially you were kind of the gatekeeper. Sometimes you would get certain people in, and then certain artists who were there, they're like, "Oh, he's a bass player," so you would play with them. Like, talk about that story that you told me, and Mober talked about too, about like I think like Ivan was in traffic or something, and you ended up playing the set with the Mogu Miller.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I look at the club, and actually, I'll correct you only in a playful way. Uh, I learned that my job was not to be a gatekeeper, but I was supposed to be an agent. So
Yeah.
that was one of Danny Myers, the restaurant guru and hospitality guru. He taught all the door people, like, you're not a gatekeeper. You're not supposed to stand at the door and be like, hey, it's 25 bucks, blah blah. You're supposed to be helping them to come in and have a great time.
Yeah.
So that, so I'm an agent, not a gatekeeper, man. So anyways, but so yeah, that legendary story for me personally, it's not legendary in any sense of the term for anyone else, but Mulgrew and Ivan, I think even Ivan might have been doing juries too, but Mulgrew was definitely doing juries at William Patterson that week, and he knew it was going to be a messed up week because he'd have to sit in juries all day long, and then he had a 6 night stint at the club, and so he knew he was going to be cutting it close. So like sound check was kind of out of the question. Normally cats arrive at 5 p.m. to do a sound check. Then the doors open for an hour, so people can have some food, get some drinks, and then the show starts at 7:30. And so no sound check, no nothing. Rodney Green, the famous drummer, was there, maybe at 6:30, and he just came quietly, set up his cymbals. He's not gonna that's another thing that we can talk about is when catches come. Can you imagine if people are eating dinner and Rodney shows up? He's like, okay, let me practice the drum. No, he goes and quietly sets up his instrument and then walks away. He lets people enjoy. So when the music starts, it really starts. You know, people know it starts.
Yeah.
So long story short, Mulgrew walks in at 7:30 on the dot, and he says, hey man, you got a bass? And I was like, Ivan dropped his bass off yesterday because Ivan was smart and he knew he was running behind. So because of juries or something, he knew he had something going on. So he had driven to Manhattan to drop his instrument off the night before. And great thing that he did for me because I got to play almost the whole first set with Professor Miller and Rodney Green. And actually, Mulgrew had invited Alvin Stone Maddox, this cat from Atlanta. He's a great singer. And Mulgrew just met him. I think he met him at a place called Churchill Downs or something like that. And Mulgrew loved him. He was like, man, this cat's great, a nice male singer, like a real cat, a real kind of Southern gentleman. And so Mulgrew invited him up for 2 nights. And so we sang a few songs with him too. But man, it was tasty, man, playing with Mulgrew on stage. And I'll never forget him announcing me and announcing Rodney. And I just remember everything about it. It was great.
Well, one of like the reasons like I don't regret going to William Patterson or paying that money or whatever I had to pay is that Mulgrew made it a point to get us students in to see those gigs wherever he was playing, and he would get us on the list. And it always struck me like anytime Mulgrew did something, he was very humble. And so was Ivan or Rodney. They would come in and be very quiet before they played, and then as soon as they play, it's like boom, and yeah, I think as someone who is at that club, the Standard, I mean, you get to see so many different musical situations. I spent a lot of time at Smalls working with them, like helping them film stuff. Like, you see a lot. You see different things. You see different people and how they interact. And that's you'll probably never forget that, no matter what happens with the Standard.
Yeah, for sure.
Talk a little bit about some reasons from your perspective why the Jazz Standard had to close.
Honestly, this Jazz Standard was doing quite well. I think it's really a question of finances, man, because the landlord was not giving any type of break during COVID times. And that's messed up. Actually, I can tell you that Jazz Standard at the beginning of it opened in 97. And of course, I had the restaurant upstairs. In 2001, possibly 2002, is when it became Blue Smoke and it started to become operated by Danny Meyer. But at the beginning, I know for a fact that it was parlaying, or for lack of a better term, it was kind of surviving because of the popularity of the restaurant upstairs. And so, but Jazz Standard became so popular that after a while it started to make its own profit without the restaurant. And of course it had the food of the restaurant in it. They served that wonderful food too. But so Jazz Standard really was doing great. I mean, better than ever up until COVID hit. And you're talking about, I'm not even gonna guess what their rent is. And I can tell you they had I believe a 15-year lease, which I think they signed for, a good deal back in the day. But you're still talking about God knows how much money. I mean, if you're closed for 8 months and your rent is 20 G's a month, let's just take a wild guess.
Yeah.
You do the math and you're like, well, I haven't made a dime, but I'm forced to pay $200K. But, that's just one of Mr. Meyer's locations. Danny Meyer has real estate all over the city, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So times 200,000 times 20. Now you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
the landlord wasn't given any kind of deal, which is a shame because some of us other locations did. They were more forgiving. And he was able to get a little bit of money, I think, to help pay his staff and stuff like that in some of his locations. But I mean, talk about a guy who's taken a hit,
Yeah.
a
I
serious
mean,
hit.
I really feel like a lot of what you say is so true. Like, um, there's two things I see. Number one, like I've talked with Spike Wilner extensively. Like, why is it that these landlords, why is it that they all own these buildings and we have to rent? Why can't us as jazz musicians come together and actually own these buildings so they can't tell us what we can and can't do in these
Well,
buildings?
you can, man. Count me in. I'll throw in a
You
couple
know,
bucks.
because we essentially at play is what you see is like the people who are really at fault. I'm going to hold the mayor of New York, Governor Cuomo, Donald Trump, anybody who lives in New York who cares about that city should be protecting these jazz clubs who are essentially like our America's true art form, our landmarks, So when they ask us to do quarantines and close down for months at a time, where is the aid and the relief for these places? If I look at,
that's the other point I was going to make is that it's not only the landlord, but it's American. This is kind of an American problem, bro.
yeah, because you
Really
see it in
up
London.
in Canada.
They
You live
pay
in
money.
Burlington,
Yeah.
Vermont. If you lived 45 minutes north from where you live right now, you'd be
Yeah.
getting $2,000 Canadian a month,
Yeah.
and the businesses are probably getting more. Just to say, okay, hey, we realize this is an act of God. There's no reason that some landlord should be sticking Mr. Meyer for 200K right now.
Yeah.
So they should say, okay, everybody chill out. We're going to give everybody some money. This is the government, a question of government. But dude, the United States is they're monetizing their own people. They don't really care about their own people. This is like the Matrix, man, where they're like work,
It's
and we're
horrible.
gonna bleed you for taxes, but we're not gonna give that money back to you. We're taking that taxes to use for our own
Believe it or
benefit.
not, like I feel this fully. I mean, I'm working a full-time job in the epidemic with a mask, like putting my health at risk. And then I see the United States now, they're giving people money to stay at home. And I'm making less than those people who are staying at home.
Well,
I mean, the whole thing is, it's so, to me, it's like the United States needs to get it together. Because you see other countries and like they've taken care of it. Taiwan just had a music festival of 10,000 people. And somebody showed me like some numbers. Taiwan has the same population as the state of Florida. So
I just saw that today. 7
Yeah.
deaths versus like however many 10,000.
16,500 deaths. So if you start looking at that, it's like it's really the people at the top. If they didn't done this right back in April when we had the first quarantine, if we had done it all right with contact tracing and stuff, we could have eliminated this.
And healthcare is a major issue, a major factor too. I mean, like you're saying, you go up north. If you're in Canada, just for example, people want to complain. Oh, well, you have to wait longer for treatment or something, but it's not necessarily true. And their people are taken care of up there a lot more so than here. How many Americans just lost their job? I think 30 million, and most of their health care is linked to their jobs. It's like if we had a safety net of this, Obamacare, which was not comprehensive to begin with, it's still a joke in comparison to Finland and France and all these other places. But at least Obamacare was, trying to fill in the gaps. But I mean, it's like no, just it's so funny too, because
Yeah.
how much it has damaged the American, GDP, and this pandemic. If everybody was covered, it would be less of an expense as a nation. But now
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like, all right, if you go to the doctor once a year, you can get little patches at a time. But if you're bleeding out, it's going to cost you more money in the end. You know what I mean? So, and
Yeah.
right now America's bleeding out, and thank God the virus number 45 is is about to be on his way out. So
I'll just put something out there for you. Like, one of the great ironies, me here in Vermont, I live close to the airport. I work close to the airport. I see those F-35s going off. If you look at them, they cost between 100 and 150 million for one plane. They've got 33 of them here at the airport. So just do that math. And then every time they fly, it's like $500,000 for fuel every time one of those planes fly. So when you just start looking at that, the amount of money that our country spends on the military alone, they could have taken a small chunk of that, maybe one or two planes, and save all these jazz clubs, or save the music in this country.
I agree. I agree.
So
it's just a matter of priorities where people want their taxes to go. And you see that it's actually kind of funny, because the poorest people oftentimes are the ones who vote against their own interest. It's like, hey, do you want this money coming back to you, or do you want it just going out into the world, into fuel costs and wars?
they're
Me
brainwashed.
personally,
They're brainwashed by TV. They're brainwashed, and then there's like the other part of like music and even the world now is like everything is social media and your image, what image you put out. So essentially everybody is looking at the image of our past president, or our soon to be past president. The image is, oh, he means business. That means America first, money. That's what everybody sees because they see The Apprentice. So it's like a symbolism for them. They don't even know anything about him. They just know
he's a joke, man. He's
that's
a joke. Do
and
you think any real billionaire would be a TV host, a reality TV host? It's like, come on.
yeah.
The guy is broke, and he's a freaking shame. So, anyways,
Yeah, I mean, so we had that discussion. I mean, you go and take a look at like I hate to like bring it up on interviews, but I'm now starting to like at the age that I am, like I feel like I could hold my own against whoever would take issue with this. But if you look at that area of 59th Street, Columbus Circle, the amount of money that's put into that, and there's articles, oh, these so-called saviors of jazz, the brothers of jazz, and then you go and look at the salary, how much they make per year. I take issue with like how jazz musicians, we should be coming together and protecting these historic venues, but instead it's like, oh, my one club's got to do better than this club, so I'm going to compete, and the streaming stuff is all competition. Like, these clubs are just struggling to survive. Why is it that the clubs got to beg for money? I mean, we should be all supporting, like, Spike Wilner is a hero. What he's doing is heroic. Why does he have to beg for money? Like, I just don't understand the priorities of this country, that we got to put these club owners in that position. They're trying to make this art form available for the masses, for the future generations. And, it's I really sympathize with someone like Spike. I read the newsletters and the stuff that he writes. It's emotional. It's traumatic,
yeah,
the way that these people are being treated. If it wasn't for Spike, we wouldn't have had Smalls for a long time. I remember talking with him and Mitch Borden. I mean, Mitch created Smalls, but Spike went and mortgage his apartment. I mean, he put a lot of money in to make that place work, and I just I hope all of us musicians like start thinking outside the box, not be part of this. Like I see
Yeah.
people like begging on the streets while they're practicing. You know, oh, send me $25 because I'm practicing here. Well, we need to all come together and protect. I mean, jazz like it's a great art form. If we don't do something about what's going on, it's not going to be here forever. You know, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think that cats need to, I completely agree with everything you're saying. And I think that one of the main things, well, I think that people are learning this now, is that you have to diversify yourself a little bit. You know,
Yeah,
it's like you can sit in your practice room for 8 hours a day, and then you can go to Smalls at night, and and try to find some gigs and stuff like that. But what I think that musicians need to do is diversify themselves a little bit and start realizing that there is money all around us. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not rich. Most of my friends aren't rich, but my especially my musician friends. You know, we're paycheck to paycheck kind of cats. But it's like if you walk down the street, you know how many people and how much money there is. It's like there's money trees all around us. If you go and sit down at a bar and you introduce yourself to somebody next to you, and they say, "Oh, well, I'm a," it's like an entrepreneurial thing. It's like I'm a lawyer or something like that. Like, oh, you're a lawyer, huh? You must be hurting for some good music. Why don't you come down to Smalls with me later? Something like that, where we take care of each other. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna go. You guys should have us play at your holiday party, man. Every time in November, I'm like, oh, you're a banker. Like, yeah, you guys need some jazz at your holiday party. Come on, let's do this. Dude, I've got so many gigs like that where somebody's like, actually, yeah, we do. My boss just mentioned, does anyone know a band? And
yeah, yeah,
it's about realizing and networking, because I feel like a lot of cats are closed off, and they're kind of like, well, I play my saxophone all day and I'm doing my part. It's like, no, actually, you're not really doing your part. You're selfish, and uh, maybe what I'm saying is not that popular.
yeah,
Because, okay, yeah, there's got to be some freaks that just like practice 20 hours a day, that
yeah,
kind of thing. But even Coltrane he was practicing 16 hours a day, or has those legendary stories. But he was a community person. He was
yeah.
involved with his church. He was, he everybody knew him. People, just knew him. So I don't know. I would like to see one of the changes I would like to see coming out of this is like, hey, you can't make it. Stop living paycheck to paycheck, man. You got to help yourself out. Try to diversify yourself a little bit. Like you said, you have a day job. You know, it's like you put in your practice time and you put in your 10,000 mastery hours. But then after that, it's like, man, you can't come up short on rent next month, man. You
Yeah,
just can't.
there's so much more to the world, and I mean, any of those people like put the myth out that like, oh, you played better because you did drugs or like because you drink or stuff. Like I see these guys down there at Smoke or Fat Cat or anything, and I see the ones that are serious and get to that next level, and I see the ones who are what happens to them over the years. Unfortunately, even the greats, some of them die because they didn't take care of themselves. And but yeah, you're absolutely right. Like I think I this interview series for me was like at the start it was just like I wanted to like say my opinions and stuff, but then I was like, no, I need to have the opinions of other people, and it
Mhm.
grew bigger and larger than me because met so many of the greats that I spoke with have since passed, and they live on through the interviews, and that
Yeah,
will
man.
always
Thank you for that.
that's like the knowledge or the great knowledge that's passed down from the elders that will continue to be passed down throughout the. That's what's so important about it. That's why I do it. Um, I'm less concerned about. Obviously, yes, I get it, connections and I try to make money with ads and stuff, but I'm less concerned about that now because I'm just more concerned with getting these guys who some of them pass, and it's important to. I'm grateful to talk with you because you were there in this great venue. Thank you for speaking with us. Speak a couple minutes about your music because I want to have you featured too. You're in Mexico right now, so talk about like your groups, kind of what you're doing in Mexico City, and how you've been doing before we finish up.
Yeah, man. Well, for the last about 5 years or so, I've been coming down to Mexico more and more. So even the last 2 years, I lived in Mexico City more than New York City, believe it or not. And I realized I actually don't have a permanent apartment anywhere, even in New York right now. So I've literally been living out of a suitcase for almost 2 years now, actually coming up in April. But so that's kind of interesting. I realized, and it leads me, it brings me back to you talking about the elders and me, mentioning that you can't just play all day, but I think back in the day, it was maybe, I don't want to say it was easier, but it was a little easier, I think. There was more money for musicians. Somebody like Ron Carter was in the studio all day making that money. Then he was at the club all night making that kind of money. And then his rent, I don't want to guess what it was, but maybe it was 200 a month. I have no idea. But we're talking about someone who made his rent in one day and then just saved money for the rest of the month,
Yeah, yeah,
and I think it's a lot different now because now it's like the same amount of money, the same loot for the gigs. They're still making $50 and a plate of pasta, and then there's kind of less gigs. There's less steady work, and so and rent. I mean, I was paying almost $2,000 per month to live in New York City, and when I started to do the math, I was like, man, $2,000 a month. What could I do with that? And you just go online and just look up. All right, you can fly to Mexico City for 350 bucks round trip, and I can get an apartment, a two-bedroom apartment here for like 400 bucks a month. So I'm doing the math. I'm like, am I going to save like $1,200 by just flying to Mexico for 3 months? Like $1,200 per month. So it was kind of funny where I had come down here enough, and there's enough good musicians down here too, and little clubs to play in, where I was like, man, I think if I go down to Mexico, I could like save money, kind of turn my finances around a little bit, and also have a great time while I'm doing it. Like Quincy Jones says, Quincy Jones is like, you should never be bored. He's like, there's languages to learn, there's
yeah,
food
yeah.
to try, there's new instrument, he's like, and I kind of get motivated by that sentiment. I'm like, man, you know what? I'm gonna like learn Spanish. And I started to realize that New York is not the only place in the world where you can thrive and be happy. You know what I mean? So here I am. I'm down in Mexico City now. I do play with a number of fine musicians here. My main group, which I kind of allow for uh, a turnover in personnel, is called Songevity, and it's kind of my dedication to the longevity of song, of good song, like good quality music. I want people to know that when they come see my groups, that we're gonna play music that is thoughtful and hopefully long lasting. So
Yeah,
that's my
it's really
vibe.
great. You definitely got the niche there in Mexico City. They tried to get me to go there, and I had, an upcoming son and stuff. I didn't go, but definitely in my future to be traveling places. Like I've always been interested in like and I was told by a monk when I was young, a Buddhist monk. I was told that I come from that place and I was reincarnated in the United States. And I want to go to like, you know, Tibet and Nepal and India and Bhutan and like the Himalayas. I've always had it in my head, I've got to go there one day, and I've got to, you know, I've got to be there. I got to go and see that, you know.
Yeah, man.
I've traveled, you know, I've traveled quite a bit, but, you know, another thing that, like for me, this aspect of my life is like figuring out discipline. Like, how can you live an awesome quality life on small income? Because if you can live well on small income, when the big income comes, you still can live well. I mean, you see so many of these basketball stars who end up drug addicts on the street with no money. They've made millions of dollars and they've blown it all, you know? So I think disciplines is incredibly important in this music, you know? And that's why John Coltrane succeeded, for example. He had discipline. He came from a place where he was a drug addict, and he got it together, and he became like an incredible musician. It's unfortunate, you know, the drinking and stuff eventually caught up with him. He was so young when he died, but I think that's the main message for any musician needs to learn is getting control of their facilities, making sure you eat healthy, sleeping right, working hard on improving a lot of things, making sure you're happy, and you know, yeah, because music is not the only thing. There's other things.
Yeah, get a good place to sleep. No, you're right. And you know, and two of our professors, both Mulgrew and Harold Mayburn, they always talked about that. Harold was always shouting in the hallway, "You got to eat your greens. You got to eat your greens."
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like, but it's a quality of life thing. You know, like you're talking about. You don't want to be a cat eating ramen twice a day, living with 6 other dirty dudes. You know, it's like, okay, that's maybe a college vibe, and maybe you have some fun doing that. But when you're, you know, when you're getting older, it gets a little old. And you know, if you're talking about longevity, you got to get a good night's sleep, man, and you gotta eat right and start taking care of yourself. And I've started to do that in the last few years more so, because I was having my fun for many years, not always eating right, you know, doing a little this and that, and partying, that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, you know, I guess you just got to get it out of your system, and that's something to explore too. Every little aspect of life is like, why not live with 6 other dudes for a little while, see how it goes? And but like you're saying, it's important to have perspective and really to start thinking, okay, how am I going to do this for a long time?
Yeah, and I mean, um, I think I'm familiar enough with you. I don't think you have any children, but that puts it in perspective for me. Like when I had a son, like I have a son who's watching everything that I do.
Yeah.
You know, he's a young boy, and he's growing up, and he's watching. Every time he sees me, on the FaceTime, I call him every day. So every time he sees me, I try to lead it by example. You know, I want my child to see good things and not bad things, because these children absorb these things, you know, and that
good for you, man.
that obviously puts things in perspective. I think it does for any musician when they have children. That'll be, you know, I'm sure. And you know, Rob, thanks for talking with us.
Thank you, Jonah.
People can check you out at your website, right? It's Rob Duguay. Is it robduguay.com? Yeah, I want to put it in the links.
Yeah, cool.
All right, thanks for talking, and hopefully we'll do another one in a few years. Yeah. See where you're at.
Anytime, man. Anytime. Good to reconnect, and thanks for doing what you're doing for the scene too, man. I appreciate you.